This meeting is being recorded.
Namaste everyone, welcome back to Dr. Pai's Astrology channel. Today we have a very special guest, Barry Rosen. Namaste Barry, welcome to our channel.
Hi, thank you for. It's great to be here. Today we're going to talk about kind of an unusual topic. I specialize in dashas, and we're going to talk about blind spots in dashas, and we'll talk about what blind spots are. Blind spots are kind of when the mind kind of tricks us into thinking one way, and it turns out to be another way. And the concept also comes if you think about if you're driving west into the sunset, you can't see anything. You're kind of blinded. And I've written a whole book about blind spots in Vedic astrology, but this talk is about blind spots and dashas. Gonna a bit about my background. I've been involved with Vedic astrology since 1987. I've been teaching what I call boutique classes since 2016. I kind of teach specialized courses. I'm just finishing up a course on relationship. I'm also, I'm an author of 5 books on Vedic astrology, and you can get a free newsletter on my website at appliedvedicastrology.com. I do consultations. Okay, let me go here's a copy of my book. Let's start with some Vedic chanting. We'll get the gods on our side. Om Ganeshaya Namaha, Om Ganeshaya Namaha, Om Ganeshaya Namaha, Om Ganapatiye Namaha, Om Ganapatiye Namaha, Om Ganapatiye Namaha, Vakratunda Mahakaya, Surya Koti Samaprapa, Nirvigyam Kurame Deva, Sarvakareshi Sarvada, Jnanamulam Guru Murti, Pujamulam Guru Padam, Mantramulam Guru Papakyam, Mokshamulam Guru Kripa. Om Asatoma Sadgamaya, Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya, Mrichama Amritam Gamaya, Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Okay. Just a quick note. I am teaching a whole year on dashas in depth starting in February. There's going to be 3 12-week classes, and early bird is about $395. There's going to be a free preview of that class on January the 4th. Go to webinar. Details are on my website. So just so you note that. I'm also teaching a course in January on income from work and life purpose. So I'm just shameless plug here. Okay, so what are we going to do today? We're going to talk about what are blind spots, how blind spots manifest in our dasha periods. If we have time, we'll talk about Rashi dashas and blind spots. Maybe that will end up being in part 2. And then we can also learn a little bit about tailoring our consultation by rising sign. That could also be probably more likely to be a separate talk. So the planets kind of impact our thoughts and emotions. And sometimes we get kind of gripped by thoughts, whether that's fear or anger. And we're kind of, our mind is kind of overwhelmed, and we can't think clearly. We can't make good judgments. And blind spots are very kind of common, and they kind of can manifest from all the planets. Mars kind of manifests blind spots around ego. We like to be right and make the other person wrong. Or you get into a conversation with somebody where you're competing. Well, I did this, and this is one-upmanship that happens with Mars. We've had a whole talk on this channel about blind spots from ego. Saturn kind of manifests blind spots about fear, and for the most time, 95% of the things we fear never happen, but our mind is always visualizing all these horrible things that will happen. And again, we always have to move beyond an astrology of fear. Saturn is actually a good friend, but it tends to blind us with fear too often. Rahu's, big malefic causer of blind spots, tends to create self-aggrandizement. In other words, I'm the greatest. Whether you like President Trump or not, he's got Sun conjunct Rahu, and he seems to always talk about his accomplishments. And we tend to be put off by self-aggrandizement. We think people should be humble. And good leaders are kind of humble. Rahu, of course, creates blind spots with paranoia, and we start fearing things, that aren't going to happen even more than Rahu. Ketu creates blind spots around self-esteem. Usually Ketu detracts. Put it in the first house, I'm not good enough. I'm not beautiful enough, so there's always this disillusionment that kind of blocks. It's kind of a blind spot because we may be very accomplished, but K2 may put us down and help us put ourselves down. Jupiter, when it causes a blind spot, Jupiter is the planet of judgment, and we need good judgment to make good decisions. When Jupiter is afflicted, it can create bad judgment. We can have a Pollyanna attitude. I often find that Venus in Taurus or Libra has that kind of quality. Venus can blind us with the senses. We kind of, want more to eat and creates addictions. And eventually that causes kind of, we thinking more sensory stimulus will make us happy, and it doesn't. Mercury creates blind spots through confusion and distorted logic. Sun creates blind spots sometimes when it's afflicted through distorted ego and desire for power and desire for leadership and things like that. That's out of balance. And the moon creates blind spots the most because it's often so afflicted through emotional impasse. I mean, it just, we get overwhelmed. Our emotions get overwhelmed. We can't function. We start imagining all kinds of things that aren't going to happen. And the moon is often afflicted in just about every chart you see or in transit because it moves so much. So now the interesting thing, how does this impact dashas? So sometimes we get a dasha. I'll give you an example. We get a dasha of a functional malefic. It's not a good planet for that rising sign, and so it kind of brings out kind of a darker quality of the dasha. So, for example, or even get. Let's take Taurus rising. Now, Taurus rising doesn't do well with Jupiter because Jupiter owns the 8th and the 11th houses, and Libra also has trouble with Jupiter because it owns the 3rd and the 6th houses. So when you put Jupiter in Taurus or Libra and that dasha is running, you find people that have kind of poor judgment, or they have kind of a Pollyanna sense of everything's going to be wonderful. See, when Jupiter gets distorted by its blind spots, it kind of gets over optimistic or falsely optimistic. Jupiter and Capricorn can do that too. When you don't have good judgment, you make bad decisions, and or you get too falsely optimistic. I had a friend who was a Taurus rising. He was in his Jupiter period. He was happy as a clam, and he was always optimistic. His job, he was going to make all this money, and his job was going to go really well, and his relationship was going to work. And, it didn't happen because it was like this false optimism. So that's an example of a blind spot, as because Jupiter is a functional malefic for Taurus rising. And so it kind of creates confusion, and it kind of blinds us to the truth. And this happens a lot, and we'll look at some more examples of this. So how do we analyze dashas anyway? To see if they're blind spots. So first of all, is the planet good for the rising sign? This is always the cardinal thing that we do first in Vedic astrology. If we're Aries rising, we know Mars and Jupiter and Sun and Moon are the best planets, and Venus and Saturn and Mercury are difficult planets. So you always have to know your sets of planets by rising sign. And so if you're and then we have to say, is the dasha ruler malefic or benefic? And again, that would be a natural malefic or a natural benefic. And so sometimes, malefics sometimes are not as bad as we think if they own the right houses. And benefics, like Jupiter for Taurus, can cause problems. I'll give you an example. I have a friend who another Taurus rising, and she went into her Saturn Mahadasha. Now, Saturn owns the 9th and the 10th. Her Saturn's very well placed in her chart. And she got horribly depressed as soon as her Saturn period started, and she thought she just lost her job, and she was, which happens at the end of Dasha periods. And she was like, oh my God, I'm not going to, no one likes me. I'm not going to bother even looking for work. And she just kind of like was depressed and at home, just kind of sulking. And somebody knocked on her door and knew that she was a very qualified administrator and offered her a really good job for a company that then ended up growing from 6 people to 700 employees. And, she benefited, greatly. But it was almost like, on a subjective level, Saturn was like saying, oh, I'm not good enough, or, I'm pessimistic or stuff like that. But because it owns good houses like the 9th or the 10th, it's a functional benefic for Taurus rising. It did bring about good results. So often there's a complex difference between the Dasha ruler, in whether it's a natural malefic or a functional, malefic, and vice versa, and same thing with benefic. So we always have to look at that. Of course, Dashas that own connected to owners of difficult houses like 3, 6, 8, and 12 usually cause problems, but they can also kind of misfire a lot too. When malefics are very afflicted, like Rahu, Ketu, Mars, and Saturn, they're kind of always causing problems. We always have the case of Bhatika. We did a whole class on Bhatika on your channel. Bhatika is connected to the 7th house for dual signs, and the 9th house for fixed signs, and the 11th house for movable signs. And I can't go into that more, but Bhatika can also cause kind of difficult problems that we can't see. And we'll look at Rashi Dashas, and we'll probably have to do that in part 2 at some point. Now, the other thing that we look at when we're timing psychology is if you're running the Dasha of the 4th Lord, that it can create, the 4th house is the heart chakra, it's the mind, it's also the emotional thing, and it can create emotional disturbances. And particularly, we don't like malefics in the 4th house. Rahu, Mars, Ketu, and Saturn are really the most difficult planets to have in the 4th house. And, Rahu and Ketu want to run away from marriage. Mars wants to fight in marriage and things like that. So it tends to create a lot of emotional disturbances. In the 5th house, if you're running the Dasha of a 5th house, we also don't like to have Rahu, Mars, Ketu, or Saturn in the 5th house because they tend to cause bad judgment. Now, 5th house, Karaka for the 5th house is Jupiter. Jupiter is a planet of judgment. And when we put malefics in the 5th house, we tend to kind of make bad decisions. We repeat mistakes, and that causes problems. And that's kind of a blind spot because we can't, even though we've made the mistake over and over again, we kind of repeat it. If you think of Bill Murray in the movie Groundhog Day, he eventually goes through so many lives as a bad weatherman until he gets it right. And, our life is like that sometimes. In the 5th house, these things get set up in our chart as, are we going to get it right this time? And it's hard getting it right when you have malefics in the 5th house. You just have bad judgment. Go ahead.
Sorry, Barry. I just have a question because I just want. So when you say afflicted lord of the 5th or in the 5th house, we are talking about 5th from the ascendant, not like 5th. You know how some people say 5th can be a sign of Leo. So if Mars, Ketu, Rahu, Saturn in Leo, but we are talking about actual 5th house from the ascendant.
Now, in Vedic astrology, we could do a whole class on this. There are multiple ways that you have to look at things. 5th house from the moon is very important, particularly for, 5th house from the ascendant is what I tend to look at more. But yeah, you can see the natural 5th sign of the zodiac, which is Leo, and planet, usually depending on the rising sign, Leo, planets in Leo. So one of the things I was just even looking at my own chart recently, I always talk about Sun in the 12th as being a problem because you're hidden from view and you have low self-esteem. And, I notice this a lot with people. It's a huge thing. It's Marna Karkastana, which is a very difficult thing to get over. But Sun in Pisces, which is the 12th sign of the zodiac, is also like Sun in the 12th. And so if even anybody with Sun in Pisces kind of can naturally bring a little bit of those problems where maybe the father didn't support you enough and you're not seen and you struggle with low self-esteem. So yeah, it's a good point to talk about the natural signs of the zodiac also. Yeah. But for
Thank you.
Dasha, yeah, it's a wonderful point. The natural signs of the zodiac are very important to look at, but usually for Dasha analysis, we usually look at from the ascendant and the moon. Okay. Okay. So there's some other kind of general points about Dashas that we should remember, that cause problems. So, I have this thing, when you pull one leg of the chair, the table, the rest of the table follows because the whole table is connected by the chairs. And sometimes we forget in Vedic astrology, planets own two houses, so they have a natural connection. So for Virgo rising, Jupiter owns the fourth and the seventh. And so by nature, they're always seeking happiness in relationship, but they're very disappointed by their destructive pickiness. So there's kind of you put a Virgo into a Jupiter period, they're going to be dealing with, those kind of issues, and they're kind of blind to them because it's kind of an innate hidden quality in the chart. So, I'm going to go to this. Okay, same thing. We could say that. For Pisces rising, Mercury owns the fourth and the seventh house too. So they also tend to kind of get into problems with codependent relationship. And that's also, Pisces has the Boudica seventh house. So they tend to kind of have very karmic relationships. And that's one of the reasons they do. Okay, let me go here. So the most important thing that you have to kind of be aware of with Dasha lords and blind spots is, are they good planets for the rising sign, or are they difficult planets for the rising sign, and how they function? So, like take a Pisces rising. Jupiter's the first house lord. Generally, would be a good Dasha, depending on how it's placed. But if go into a Jupiter-Venus period, Venus is the most difficult planet for Pisces rising because it owns the third and the eighth houses. And the third and the eighth houses are very kind of sexual houses, and Venus is a very sexual planet. So there could be a Jupiter-Venus period could create a blind spot around sexual indulgence. And it just kind of, suddenly you go into a Jupiter-Venus period and your Pisces rising, and suddenly you find yourself just, not being able to control your sexual impulses, and it takes you out of Dharma. So let's think about, let's look at Harvey Weinstein as an example. Here I have the South Indian chart. I tend to like those a little bit better. I apologize if I didn't have time to transfer it to the north. Harvey Weinstein was famous film producer, and his company put out all these incredible films, Good Will Hunting and Shakespeare in Love, and we just look forward every year to whatever the Weinstein Company was producing. And then in 2017, people started coming forward, and the Me Too movement started, where all these film actresses who had been, auditioned for films were kind of sexually seduced by Harvey Weinstein in order to get into these films. And they eventually got, pretty upset, and they started suing him and charging him, and he eventually went to jail. So what's interesting about his chart, again, he's Libra rising, and he's got Mars in Libra. Now that naturally creates kind of a passionate person. But again, Mars is kind of Lord of the seventh and the first. Mars in Libra is kind of a, it's a marka, but it's kind of, he can't control his passions because, Mars kind of takes over with his aggressive nature. And then the chart lord Venus is in the 5th house of romance, conjunct Rahu. Now, Venus and Rahu is a great um, yoga and planetary conjunction for creativity, and he was incredibly creative as a film producer. And yet, it creates insatiable sexual desire also for women. So you can kind of see how this is playing out. And Jupiter, which is not a good planet for Harvey Weinstein, because it's it owns the 3rd and the 6th. Even though it's strong in Pisces, it's the Atmakarika, which causes kind of poor judgment and difficult problems. And he's got a debilitated Mercury, which is canceled, but at the same time, it is impeding his judgment. Any ethical person knows that you don't seduce your film stars if you don't want to get put in jail. He was kind of blind to the whole thing. Now, we have in my Dasha course, we'll learn some advanced rules about Dashas, but Harvey has Moon in the 3rd house. And some of the advanced rules in Vedic astrology say that if you have Moon in the 3rd house, you're supposed to calculate the starting Dasha differently. So when Harvey got found out and arrested, he was in the Ketu Rahu period. And Ketu Rahu is always kind of one of the more karmic periods that you can imagine. Obviously, Ketu and Rahu on the ones, if you rotate the chart around Ketu, it puts Rahu in the 7th house with Venus. And, Rahu is always a very kind of karmic planet. Rahu's in Mars' nakshatra, so it brings in this Mars sexual conquesting thing, energy. But so he got arrested at the end of his Ketu Rahu period, and then he got sentenced to go to jail at the end of his K2 period and K2 Mercury. And the end of a Dasha period is often kind of a vulnerable period, and Mercury owns the 12th house of jail. He's got Saturn in jail, Saturn in the 12th house also, and you can see how this kind of incredible star and multimillionaire's life just unraveled because he couldn't control himself, and he was kind of blind to what was going on. Mars was creating a blind spot to, he wasn't aware of his aggressive nature. Rahu's always causing blind spots because it just, insatiable desires that we can't control. It's a very interesting chart. Okay. Okay. So when understanding and analyzing dashas for blind spots, we like to, the first thing you want to look at is the dasha ruler benefic or malefic for you. And, like I said, we have to learn, all those kind of rules. But in general, I find that people, often the wool is kind of over our eyes in a difficult dasha period, and it's not until we've had some difficult lessons, that we kind of see what's really going on and what we're doing. And I gave some examples, earlier, but Rahu periods by nature are particularly difficult because Rahu is always about blinding illusion and such. There's certain combinations that are just always difficult subjective pairings. Jupiter Mercury periods are often just really difficult. Rahu Ketu periods, Ketu Rahu periods are always difficult. Rahu Saturn periods. By nature, one of the ways that you can study dashas is, when you get a pairing in a dasha bhukti combination, you can just think about what is that conjunction like. Okay, so Rahu and Saturn, if you have a Rahu Saturn conjunction in your chart, that is often, creates extreme paranoia, extreme anxiety. If there are a lot of malefic aspects to Rahu and Saturn in your chart, if they're conjunct, that could also be a signature for the disease of cancer. So whenever you go into a Rahu Saturn period, by nature, you're going to get kind of this difficult and energy. And so I have to kind of caution people when they're in Rahu Saturn periods that the anxiety and the things that you're making up in your head are probably not going to happen, but it's the nature of Rahu and Saturn to be, paranoid and extremely anxious. So what you have to, the nature of doing Dasha analysis for people is helping them see the Maya, the blind spots, because there's always blind spots on every Dasha, because most of the time the planets are afflicted and things like that. The other thing we should know about difficult Dasha sometimes is that the beginnings and endings of Dasha are very difficult. Usually we talk about the endings of Mahadasha as being Dasha Sandhi. And it's a time when the karma from the last, anywhere, from 6 to 20 years is kind of being completed, depending on the length of the Dasha. And we often tell people not to make major decisions during a Dasha Sandhi period. And inevitably, people make bad decisions because that's what happens. So, like, for example, an example of Dasha Sandhi is the end of a Mars period. Mars moon is a Dasha Sandhi period. It's about to go into a Rahu period. The end of a Ketu period, Ketu Mercury is going to go into a Venus period. The end of a Jupiter period is, Jupiter Rahu, it's about to go into Saturn period. So there are all these kind of big transitions that happen at the end of Dasha's periods. And usually if you make a major decision like quitting your job or moving or changing relationships or something at the end of the period, you generally have bad judgment, because there's this energy from the whole period kind of needing to complete. So it's very kind of important to, maybe wait for the period to end. I see this happening all the time with people. People come to me at the end of Rahu more, at the end of, the big one is often Rahu Mars, which is the end of the 18-year Rahu period. And it just, people are going through divorces and they want to change careers and their whole life is falling apart. And you have to let them know that it will be better because Jupiter's coming, if Jupiter's a good planet for them. But if they make too many difficult decisions, they may run into trouble. So sometimes, the Dasha Lord itself, by its nature, is going to, create a blind spot, because the Dasha ruler really is the most important thing. It kind of governs the whole planet. When we're running a Dasha, we have to rotate the chart around the Dasha. So it's like that planet goes into the first house. So you go into a Jupiter period, then Jupiter's in your first house, and that's usually wonderful. You go into a Rahu period, Rahu's in your first house. You go into Ketu period, put Ketu in the first house. Ketu always creates like self-deprecation, poor low self-esteem, and not being invisible, and so you have to understand what's going on, because the Dasha Lord rotates into the various houses. Like Jupiter periods are, like I said, are difficult for Libra and Taurus rising. They're functional malefics, and people feel great, and I see this all the time. People feel great in their Jupiter periods for, sometimes we would rather feel great than not have anything happen. But, there's this dichotomy, and sometimes Saturn periods, they feel terrible, but things happen. So this is, for Taurus and Libra. So it's kind of, I used those examples before. Sometimes there's a dichotomy between the subjective nature of the Dasha and the objective reality. And most of us would rather feel good rather than, but when our life doesn't work, we're also pretty frustrated, So I mentioned these Dashas. Go ahead. So these Dashas are naturally pretty difficult. Rahu Mars, Venus Mercury, it's the end of the period. Ketu Mercury, Rahu Ketu, we just saw that we saw Ketu Rahu with Harvey Weinstein. Jupiter Saturn. There are exceptions. Jupiter Saturn, for some reason, I don't know. I've never seen anybody go through a good Jupiter Saturn period. There are exceptions, when you learn all the advanced rules of dashas, sometimes these combinations, can be okay, but they're usually, very kind of fraught. Let's see.
So Barry, so when you're saying those combinations that you just mentioned, for example, if somebody is in Rahu Dasha and Ketu Antardasha, that can be, is that what you're saying?
Yes, those are just very karmic periods by nature.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay, thank
and
you.
there
Yeah.
can be exceptions. I have Jupiter aspecting my Rahu and my Ketu, and it really kind of saves both of them. So my Rahu Ketu period was pretty much fine. Actually, there's a lot of good things that happened in it, but it's for the most part, there's certain combinations that almost never work. So we come up with like rules that work 80% of the time, but there are always going to be exceptions. Um, I can't think of anybody I've done a chart for that's had a good Jupiter Saturn period, and I don't. And part of it is because Saturn, Jupiter Saturn sometimes is a good combination for manifesting things, but for some reason, at the beginning of a Jupiter period, the energy kind of falls off with that Saturn bhukti, and it's kind of dramatic, and you just can't. It takes a while to kind of recover from it. Jupiter and Saturn are not always really bad together in a chart, and they're the most mature periods. But for some reason, the Jupiter Saturn Dasha bhukti combination just is very hard. And some other things. I'm trying to keep this basic. I want to share one more thing with you. I think I could probably fit this in best here with our remaining time, and then we'll do Rashi Dashas as a part two. Rashi Dashas on blind spots later. But one of the things that I've written an article on. I'm missing a slide here. Excuse me. Is sometimes it's important for those of your clients who are professional astrologers or do consultations for people. It's important to kind of do a consultation based on their rising sign and what they're interested in. So, for example, Cancers are interested in how they feel because they're ruled by the moon, and they want to know how they're going to feel in a dasha period, or how they're going to feel when these transits happen. So they often have trouble with like the material aspects of life. Cancer is a rising sign that they have trouble with material things, and managing their material world, but they're most interested in how they're going to feel. So if you do a reading for these people, you have to kind of help show them how they're going to feel. Leos, of course, are more interested in status and leadership and career, and so you have to kind of focus. I don't get too many Leos asking me for readings, I think, because they kind of know it all often. So it's very interesting. You have to avoid confrontation or challenging Leos, obviously. Virgos, I get a lot of readings for Virgos. They often need practical advice with action and solution steps. So, and they often need healing remedies. So, whenever you do a Virgo rising chart, you have to emphasize health more. You have to come up with practical advice on what they can do. Libra rising, they're into sharing and relationship and sensual experience. So I often, when Libras are suffering in relationship, I often have to tell them to get massages because they need touch very much. And just about everyone I talk to who's Libra rising, before as soon as I mention massage, they say, "Yeah, I get that every week." But the with Libras, you always have to kind of do a reading on an intimate level of sharing. Scorpios are kind of interesting when you're doing consultations for them because you need to go into hidden realms of the psychology and into their deep spiritual nature. And if they bring up sexual issues, that's what they want to talk about. But, they're deeply intuitive and spiritual, and they need kind of deep intuitive and spiritual healing and supportive energies when I love doing Scorpio readings because they're kind of deep divers and they really want to know the hidden aspects of their life, the kind of the blind spots and the hidden psyche, and why things are not working sometimes. Sag is a sign about spirituality and religious life, and they're very optimistic. But you need, it's important to kind of tell them the truth because Sag is always about the truth, and you can't be too ideal and optimistic with them. I mean, you want to be ideal and optimistic with them. At the same time, they really kind of are wanting to hear the truth. Capricorn rising, you have to support them. It's a Saturn sign. You have to support them with safety and security. It's people, Capricorns often come to me, in a fearful mode, like, is this going to happen to me? Is that in this Dasha? Is the roof going to fall upon my head? What kind of health problems am I going to have? So you have to really support them in not being fearful too much, because again, Saturn gets out of control being too fearful with negative thinking, and you have to support them in moving beyond that. Aquarius, you have to support them with creativity, social services. So Aquarians, it's 11th natural sign of the zodiac. It's connected to groups and social actions, and if they're not involved in service work or humanitarian issues, if they get too caught up in paranoia and rebellion because of the Rahu energy of Aquarius, you've got to help move them out of their kind of craziness that Rahu can create into like doing something in the community and volunteering in the community, because that really fulfills their nature. Pisces charts are really interesting. You have to support them with being practical about money and material success. They usually come to you asking you about spiritual issues and when am I going to get enlightened and things like that. But they, in reality, they really need help with like being down to earth and getting into kind of practical things. I have the other slide earlier, but it got misplaced. And then Aries rising, Aries is really interesting. They need kind of straight talk, action steps to help them get through things done, focusing and praising talents and abilities. Aries' ego is always about getting stuff done, so you have to help them in the readings show what they need, to accomplish things. They like checking the boxes off to feel like their ego is good. They've gotten it done. Taurus rising, they're always into more material things, business, money, and Taurus, when it gets afflicted, can get a little bit lazy. So you have to kind of help them get unstuck. Gemini is I always do a lot of Gemini rising. Gemini, they're more they come to you kind of like wanting to know why things are happening. Why am I suffering in this way? Why they understand the why in their chart. Why am I suffering? And in talking about these signs, I mean, you can look at the ascendant. You can also just see, when you get somebody with 4 people in a rising sign, 4 planets in a rising sign, it kind of takes over becomes a stellium. It kind of takes over the chart. So recently had somebody with 4 planets in Gemini, and it wasn't their rising sign, but the rising sign Lord was in Gemini, and it was with 3 planets in Gemini, and it was really clear that focusing on why things were happening was just really important to them. So this is something I found this in my notes, and I just wanted to share it with people because everybody, we know people are very different, and then even when we do consultations, we have to remember to focus the consultation around what the person really wants based on their nature. So let me go back to some opening things here.
I just really like your presentation, Barry, and also the way you put everything together. It's so beautifully done. A lot of
Yeah,
effort. Yeah.
thank you. So here's my contact information. My website's appliedvedicastrology.com. You can send me email. That's my personal address. My office number is there. I'm on Facebook and a number of different places. But my website has a place to get a free newsletter, which comes out twice a week. And if you're interested in my upcoming courses on Dashas, please let me know. And there's a sign up. There's a free preview on January 4th at 11:30 on my website. You can sign up for that. And if you're interested in the Dasha class, I think Dashas are fascinating. I've been deeply studying Dashas since 1987, and I'm teaching a whole year on it because I think there's so much that we can do with it. And there's a lot of advanced material that no one ever teaches.
And what is covering in the 3 to 12 weeks of classes? So that is early bird price, $395. 3 to 12 weeks, so it's
actually 3 12-week classes. It's part 1, 2, and 3.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, it's 3 12-week classes, so it's parts 1, 2, and 3.
Okay.
One is the basic level. By week 10 we get to part 3, we're going to, in part 2 covers Chara Dasha, which we'll do in our second talk on blind spots, which are Rashi Dashas. There are Dashas that are connected to signs of the zodiac. I'm in Aquarius period at the moment. Very revealing. Rashi Dashas are a whole lot easier to predict everything from, and they particularly the things that people are interested in. And then in part 3, I'm going to do more advanced things like looking at advanced alternative dashas, Narayana dashas. There are like 32 dashas. Sometimes there are dashas that we need to choose that work better because the person has Sun in the 10th house or Rahu in a Kendra. There are all these like advanced, and I find that these alternative dashas are more revealing. Vimshotri dasha is the hardest one. It's just we'll learn it first, but that once we learn kind of the basics of how to do any of the dashas, Vimshotri or any of the Rashi dashas, then we can learn all the dashas and use the same rules. So that's kind of nice. Yeah.
And what about the other mini course that you're teaching that is on the income? And do you want to tell the audience a little bit about the other one too?
Yes, that's coming up first. I don't have a preview of that coming, but this is somebody that's on everything's mind. I mean, I actually have a 16-week course on finding your life purpose. I'm going to maybe have 1 or 2 kind of summary lessons on it, but there are things in your chart. The 11th house is not where we look for money from work. The 11th house is connected to groups and networking and friends and friend networking. It has nothing to do with income. So in Jaimini astrology, we have to use the 11th from the Aruda Lagna to see how we make money, and then there are some other Jaimini techniques that are important. It turns out the trines from the Aruda Lagna and the intersection of the trines from the Aruda Lagna and the Kendras from the moon will point to one sign, and that sign will be your golden goose sign for where you should focus on making money. So like my golden goose sign is Scorpio, and so money for my chart is connected to things in Scorpio: research, Vedic astrology, psychology, counseling. Chemistry is also Scorpio, though I was good at chemistry, but I didn't pursue a career in it. But so there, we can find what sign in our chart is most connected to money, and there are a couple techniques that we'll learn. And the life purpose part is sometimes how we earn money and what our life purpose are different. So we get artist souls who don't always make money from their music, but they have to do it, and it's really connected to their life purpose, but they may have to wait on tables during the day. So sometimes we can, we have to look for, congruences in how to move toward manifesting money from your career and your life purpose. But it's something I specialize in, in readings and stuff like that. But I'm going to do a 4-week mini course on it. And there's, so you can email me about the sign up is actually, if you go to my webpage, appliedvedicastrology.com, when the homepage pops up, it advertises that course. So you can sign up for that. It's $99. And it'll be every Saturday live between 11:30 and 1:30 Central Time. And if you can't make the live classes, or if you miss one, they're always recorded and you can watch the replays. So
Okay, nice. Thank you. I will also put a link below I'll be having a link for Barry's website, appliedvedicastrology.com, when I'm posting the video. So if you guys want it, we'll have the link and also the email address to connect with Barry. Thank you so much, Barry, for coming to our channel and really sharing such a profound lecture and the information. I really enjoyed it. And I always do enjoy your work, the psychology, astrology. Thank you very much.
thank you.
And we'll definitely come back with part 2, continuing whatever we have missed today, because I had a short time. So definitely come back and continue with our part 2. Thank you. And if you guys have any questions, either email Barry or leave us a comment below.